We want to begin today with a look at some new information coming out about those attacks on the American consulate in Benghazi, Libya. So let's go out and lay out what happened. This all started on September 11th, nearly 3 weeks ago. 4 Americans, including a U.S. ambassador, Christopher Stevens, was killed. The following weekend, the UN ambassador Susan Rice made the rounds on the Sunday talk shows explaining what happened.
Our current best assessment, based on the information that we have at present, is that, in fact, what this began as was a spontaneous, not a premeditated, response to what had transpired in Cairo. In Cairo, as you know, a few hours earlier, there was a violent protest that was undertaken in reaction to this very offensive video that was disseminated.
Well, now it turns out she might have been totally wrong. That, in fact, what happened was a deliberate and organized terrorist attack carried out by extremists. Those words from the Director of National Intelligence in a statement released on Friday. It seems they're backtracking, saying also, quote, as the intelligence community collects and analyzes more information related to the attack, our understanding of the event continues to evolve. Now, as you can imagine, it didn't take long before this would all turn political, with several top Republican lawmakers now calling for Ambassador Susan Rice to step down.
I think there's certainly political overtones. How else could you trot out our UN ambassador to say this was a spontaneous demonstration?
Maybe they thought that at the time.
5 days later, that doesn't pass the smell test. It was either willful ignorance or abysmal intelligence.
This was such a failure of foreign policy message and leadership, such a misstatement of facts as were known at the time, and for her to go on all of those shows and to, in effect, be our spokesman for the world and be misinforming the American people and our allies in countries around the world, to me, somebody has to pay the price for this.
So lots going on here in the events surrounding this tragedy, and we want to sort of get to the bottom of everything here. To help me do that, I'm joined by Tony Schaefer with the Center for Advanced Defense Studies. He's also the author of the book, Operation Dark Heart. Hey there, Tony. You're a former lieutenant colonel in the Army, and you know a little bit about how this process works. What's your read on how this is, trickled out?
Well, badly to begin with, and frankly, as you pointed out, politically. Let me be very clear. I was on another network talking about this the day after it happened, and I said it was a terrorist event, it was planned, and all the information that I got that first day from my sources turned out to be completely true. So the bottom line is this. Somehow, the information I received from my sources who are pretty much close to what's going on was given to the White House as well. So the question becomes, why was the information that was provided to me accurate, as it turns out, same information provided to the White House, yet they had a completely different interpretation of it? And there's more to come. Let me be very clear on this and very quickly state that there's more evidence coming out that this was not only neglect from the White House, that this was indeed a very factually planned and implemented cover-up, as John McCain just pointed out. I disagree with him on a lot. This is one point I agree with him on. It's very clear that Ambassador Rice was rolled out to give a false party line to the nation. Yeah,
that's what I was going to say. I mean, as this sort of the story started to evolve or change, it made you ask one of two questions. Should the public be more concerned that the government knew and didn't tell, or that they didn't know, especially considering how many intelligence officers they had on the ground? Tony, you said that you sort of predicted this, said what your sources had told you the day after this happened. Libya, officials in Libya seem to be saying the same thing that you were.
Right.
And yet the United States public, the United States press, was getting a different message. What was going on here?
Well, the White House should have said in its own interest to say, we don't know what happened, and not give anything. Just say, we just don't know. Instead, they gave this complete false impression that relates to a sci-fi story, as best as I can tell. And let me be very clear on the current evidence that the public has and why the White House should have just told the truth first. So FBI is still trying to get to the freaking crime scene, which is an important aspect and necessary to resolve what actually happened. Look, in the book Operation Dark Heart, FBI is in comment with us. You cannot use the excuse that they can't provide their own protection. Secondly, the media is still in this area, still reporting. So this threat is apparently not that great. So the bottom line is that the narrative that they're putting out now about everything that's going on is fundamentally flawed, and I think that's why you see this flailing back and forth. But the bottom line question, to answer your question, is yes, the American public should have been told immediately, and this is but one more aspect of the politicization of national security issues, which clearly should not happen ever, but yet it does.
I thought it was really interesting, too, when you sort of break this event into its different parts. Just a couple days after the event happened, I don't know if you heard about this or remember, a CNN crew actually found a journal, a personal journal, written by Ambassador Stevens that seemed to suggest that there was a whole lot of information coming through, that he may be a target, that there may be a threat there. Instead of sort of getting into the specifics of that or assuring the American people in some way, instead of doing that, what does the U.S. State Department do? They get angry at CNN for sharing that information, for doing what journalists are supposed to do, you know, picking up a piece of evidence left on a scene that clearly wasn't taken away. So my question to you, Tony, is why wasn't this you know, entire building, this entire scene of the crime, you know, cleared of all the evidence?
Well, two reasons. First, I think the truth is going to be far more severe than we even know. I'm hearing that one of the missions that the ambassador had assigned to him was outreach to al-Qaeda. So if you outreach to a Cobra, the Cobra is probably going to strike you. And I think that's what happened here. I think you're going to find, as we go into this more and more, there are going to be very embarrassing facts come out. I actually compared this to Camp Chapman. If you all recall, back in 2009, al-Qaeda was able to blow up CIA's quote-unquote best analysts regarding bin Laden in Afghanistan. I think you're going to see something similar here. Secondly, of course, you don't want to secure a crime scene if you're worried about what's going to come out regarding your own failures. I think, again, I have a great deal of confidence that within the next 2 to 3 days, you're going to see more information come out showing that the State Department was criminally negligent in helping Ambassador Stevens protect himself. And I think it's going to come to be known that they were essentially a co-conspirator almost in his demise by the fact they did not act on his concern and, frankly, the concerns of others, which will be coming out here very shortly.
So, Tony, just to be clear, I mean, you're saying from what your sources have told you, A, that, you know, all of those in charge knew exactly that this was going to happen?
That's what I'm saying. Yes,
and the other part here that you mentioned that I hadn't heard anything about is that perhaps Ambassador Stevens' next assignment would have been to go try to communicate with, talk with members of al-Qaeda?
No, he was already doing it. That's my point. No, I got from one of my inside sources that part of his job there was actually to do this outreach, to quote unquote do outreach and relationship building. So my friends also tell me they weren't vetting the guys they were dealing with. So obviously, I think you're going to find that the so-called local security was badly infiltrated by elements of those who are allied with al-Qaeda. And again, this is more criminal negligence as far as I can tell.
That's really interesting because, you know, I'm not an expert in these matters whatsoever, but it seems to me that when you're dealing with those kind of assignments, that would be more jobs for the CIA and not a United States ambassador.
Well, let me hit that real quick. The ambassador's job is to actually perform the missions assigned to him regarding our policy. And this goes back to the core of why they're trying to hide all this. The policy there was to do outreach to try to bring some of these outlier groups back into what they considered the mainstream of Libya politics. And I think, again, this is why you saw the failure that we did, because this was a policy issue, not simply a security issue.
Real quick, Tony, I want to talk a little bit politically about this. Mitt Romney wrote an op-ed that appeared in yesterday's Wall Street Journal. He called for a new course in the Middle East, and in it he comes down on President Obama's foreign policy, saying, quote, amid this upheaval, our country seems to be at the mercy of events rather than shaping them. We're not moving them in a direction that protects our people or our allies. Tony, last question. Should this attack and the way it was handled be viewed as a failure by the Obama administration?
Fundamentally, the belief has been within the administration, from the folks I've talked to, is that this new outreach we're doing, what the right calls appeasement, what the left calls outreach, is not working by the fact that, you know, it's like trying to give people a big hug. A lot of people don't want the hug. And I think what you're seeing here is a real problem by the fact that you cannot appease certain groups. You can try to bring a horse to water, but you cannot make him drink. You cannot give people to democracy if they have no tradition for it. And I think that's what he's talking about here. And I think that's why I call the White House's policy a policy of wishful thinking. They wish one thing, but reality is dramatically different.
All right, very interesting stuff. As always, Tony Shaffer with the Center for Advanced Defense Studies joining us from Fairfax, Virginia.
Thank you.